Grew up, yes, in Highlands, I guess, Bardstown Road area. Started at St. Francis, and then when they built St. Raphael's, then we were geographically in that parish, so we switched to St. Raphael's, and then to Assumption. Probably in high school, yeah. Yeah, I think in high school I had some really fine teachers, Mercy teachers. But I also had some with whom I think I had a lot of conflict. So while the vocation thing was stirring in me, that did not seem to be a choice for me, like the Mercy Sisters. And I'd had the Ursulines in elementary school, and my family, my dad especially, had maintained friends with some of the older Ursuline sisters at the time. So there was an ongoing connection with them. I started college at Nazareth downtown. It was Nazareth then. And also in July of that year, after I graduated, Mom went through a pretty serious surgery. So I think I just put it out of my mind. I didn't even think about vocation. And I had already been accepted to Nazareth College at the time. But then about in the middle of the year, I visited, it was Sister Ramunda, who I think had the most influence in my heart. And so I went to visit her and just knew then that that's what I wanted to continue to do. She was at St. Elizabeth's at the time, teaching there, teaching music. And her music room was in the basement of the convent. And I think, I mean, I never called her ahead of time. I just appeared at the door when they were leaving church. It was in the evening, and she saw me, and she somehow signaled to whoever was her superior that she wanted, or that I wanted to talk with her, and we were going into her music room. And I mean, I learned later that that was against night silence. But that didn't faze her. I mean, she picked up on that I was there for a reason, and so did what she needed to do. and that's kind of where it clicked. Like I said, I wasn't that conscious of all that dynamic in the moment, but I think her openness and her reception just to hear me. And I mean, I had not seen her since I'd not seen her for a long time before that. I was studying to be an elementary school teacher. Switching from Nazareth was a little bit difficult for me. I really liked my teachers, and I especially I remember still a philosophy teacher that just excited me, challenging thought processes, figuring out stuff. So that was a challenge, and it was a disappointment to. I don't know, I guess maybe I thought I was going to be able to continue there. I don't really know what I thought at the time. And then getting those credits transferred. So it was like in December then, at the end of December, which was when our term was ending anyway, that I switched. And fortunately, those credits switched too. But we were about 18 in our group. And it was very formal. There were desks and chairs, and within the classroom itself there was, but the indication was that when you left the classroom you came directly back here. You didn't stop along the way to chat with anyone. But we were in mixed classes. In the college. Yeah, it was still, because basically Ursulines were educators, so it just kind of fell in there. In terms of the postulancy itself, it was pretty structured. I mean, it was very structured. And we actually didn't have much communication at all with the other sisters who were living in the other part of this building, nor with the novices. I mean, you really were not supposed to speak with the novices at all. But life was structured in such a way that, you know, you did everything with the other postulants that you were with. But in terms of the changes with Vatican II, I had an uncle who was a priest. He was a resurrectionist priest, and he was very forward-looking. He was very innovative in his thinking long before Vatican II ever happened. And he used to bring me these articles to read when he would come, like once a month for visiting or whatever. And I got very excited about anything that, and most of it had to do with the liturgy itself, because I think the impact of Vatican II happened first through the liturgy for most folks. You know, that was the visible piece that affected people's lives. So when things began to change, and even before Vatican II itself, there were some liturgical changes that began to happen, like singing during communion. And I remember when our music teacher in the postulancy announced that we were going to sing during communion. I remember tears coming down my eyes, because I was already ready for this. I was already hoping for this, and it just resonated with something that I knew was a good thing to do. So I credit the vision of my uncle a lot for preparing me theologically and liturgically, especially spiritually, for those changes, you know. I think there was a lot in my family that was geared toward service and toward looking after the person who didn't have or wasn't able, you know. And then, and so that was right during the, Martin Luther King movement, the civil rights movement, and changes politically, the Voting Rights Act, and so there was a lot stirring in Louisville at that time. And I remember we participated. Let's see. Oh, this was my first year out of the novitiate, out of the juniorate, and it was at St. Elizabeth's. And there was a big march downtown. And I remember saying, it was Shirley Ann was both the superior and the principal. And I said to her, I said, we have to participate. And she looked at me. She had a lot of confidence in me. She was a great help to me, actually, in my first year out. But I think she trusted me. And so I think there were 4 of us who participated in that march. We were marched down Broadway. Other congregations who participated as well, yes. Yes, I think I know there were priests who participated as well, also. That was in, that was my first, no, I wasn't a novice. I was what we called a junior sister. I had made first vows. That was my first year, after leaving the mother house, when we were sent out to mission. That was to St. Elizabeth's. I taught the 8th grade. I loved it. I loved teaching. It was a challenge to me. But there was another sister who did, let's see, did she do, I think she did 7th grade and I did 8th grade. But we worked well together, and she was very supportive of me too. first year out. And it was in St. Elizabeth's when I received the obedience to go to Rome. Now, I was in first vows. When we were in the novitiate, the sister who was in charge of education for the whole community interviewed each one of us and asked us what we wanted to continue studying beyond our bachelor's degree. And I said, theology. And she just looked at me and she said, well, you know, women don't study theology. That was a shock. It just never occurred to me that that was, you know, not. So then it was a couple of years later, maybe just a year later, when this program in Rome opened up for religious women throughout the world. And it was a 4-language program. So I think when our superior got word of that and was encouraged by what is now called the LCWR, that Conference of Religious, I think all superiors were encouraged to send sisters on for further education. And so I got what we called then the obedience to study in Rome. Oh, Dad cried. Yeah, my dad cried. Yeah. And I lived with the Ursulines of the Roman Union. They had a huge house there, and they were an international community. So that was another really enriching experience, that people of all languages were there. And it was in Italy, but the language of the house was French. I knew a little bit of French. Well, I'd studied French, but I didn't know it very well. But everybody in the house was kind of forced to speak French, because that became the common language. So no one spoke French real well except the French. So you didn't feel too bad struggling through the language, you know. That was an exciting time for me too, because some of those women were they were very forward-looking in philosophy and in theology and in world issues. They were very connected to world issues, to the sisters who were just coming out of Poland, the ones who were just coming out of Czechoslovakia, because of the oppression there. So it was just, yeah, I did my thesis there too, which took about half year longer or so. And then I was in Rome for the closing of the Second Vatican Council. I had gone over to study, and it just happened to be that the last year. And we didn't get much information here about what was in the process. Some from the liturgical movement, but beyond that, we didn't get much information at all. But being in Rome then, we immediately started reading the documents, we started studying the documents. It was that was the thing to do, that you knew you had to you wanted to. The spirit was, circulating, was vibrating in Rome itself, and especially in religious communities. So that it was just, for me, it was a very exciting time. I think I was surprised when I came back to the States, which was like maybe 3.5 years later, that here there was some resistance to that, because my world for those 3.5 years was just that. That was it. At Ursuline Academy, teaching religion. That was high school. Yeah, within the community there was, a tension, I think a big tension over the changes in Vatican II, but also in the school. But there were a couple of other teachers who were very interested in the changes of Vatican II. So we kind of built a team there, and we worked well together. Yeah. The work in social justice happened mostly then, for me, through what was the Senate of Religious at the time. It was when religious congregations formed what they called the Senate, and we had a lot of, we promoted a lot of social justice activities, especially participation in, the strikes that Cesar Chavez was behind, the farm worker movement, and then also the racial situation, still very current. Putting out publications for information, trying to get that circulated, and we did marches and protests around some of the major grocery stores to get farm worker lettuce, especially the farm worker lettuce in the stores. I can't remember which chain of grocery stores it was. Here in Louisville, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the lettuce and the grapes mostly were the two issues that affected Louisville. Most of it was really pretty basic, like building relationships with the schools in the West End, but through the religious communities. I think that was, at that time, that was the kind of the channel to go through. And also we wanted to be sure that other religious communities were, and that was no problem because the Loretta Sisters were in the West End, the Charities had schools in the West End, and so there were a lot of, any big activity that we had, all of those communities were supportive. I mean, we all kind of worked together. And in the Senate itself, there were representatives from all of those religious communities. So that was kind of like the networking. We didn't always have so much support from the diocese itself, but through the religious communities we did. And the parishes that they were connected with, for the most part, yeah, were supportive too. I think we went into a modified habit before we actually got out of the habit. So I felt like it was a step forward. I felt like there was still, a long way to go. But yeah, it was a step forward. I think a lot of people say that that's not true, but gosh, even now when you see, a sister in a full habit, you don't feel the same connection. Maybe if you take time to get to know her, it changes. But the way people dress, I think, gives a message. I think our process in the community in terms of moving into Vatican II was very slow, because even with religious, you were supposed to have a more open chapter, the chapter which is like the main governing body. It was still, we were still electing, a limited number of persons who could participate. And moving to full chapter was a challenge, and it was definitely a process for us. That went through the 80s and then into the early 90s, I think. I don't remember exactly when it changed totally, but the chapter itself is the main governing body for any religious institute. And it goes beyond the elected officers, which was the Mother Superior, and so forth. And so Vatican II really encouraged what they called first a general chapter, which was an opening up everything about religious life and looking at it with new eyes. And there were commissions, all kinds of commissions and processes for making those changes. Everybody had to vote. It was a strict voting process. But the changes happened little by little. I mean, they didn't happen all at once. All of the religious communities rewrote their constitutions. It was a totally different focus as to who you were and what you were about. That was when we were encouraged to revisit the charism of the foundress, and that changed the perspective that we had on who we were as religious. And not just up until that time, I think for ourselves, we were teachers. I mean, that was basically who we were. We were teachers. But then we began understanding the charism in a different way, so that living the charism didn't mean necessarily teaching. It could be, it might be, but not only that. And so there was a branching out into other kinds of ministries. But like I say, all of this was a process. It didn't just happen overnight and gradual. And then people, some people, because of their ministries, they were taken out of state, so they may have to live alone. And you can't live alone. A sister living in an apartment. So those were visual changes, but they went a whole lot deeper than that to really understanding ourselves differently as a community. And then little by little, that chapter was open to anybody who really wanted to participate, basically. Much more participative, much more open. After UA, well, when I left UA, they had announced the closing, so it stayed open one more year with just seniors and juniors, I guess. I can't remember exactly, but stayed open one more year, so I didn't continue there. They didn't need me there anymore. Parallel to ministry was like the changes in people who were entering religious life. So there was a whole other dynamic going on here with formation, what we called formation, Passionsi novice. And those who were in formation at the time, whoever was in charge of them was moving on. And the community was opening the position to, people could suggest names. So a number of those people who were in formation asked me if I would put my name in the pot, because you had to do that yourself. So I did, and so then I was asked to be in charge of formation. So I worked in formation for about 3 years, but then I was doing part-time teaching at Sacred Heart, because still the focus was in this direction. I think that the challenges were negotiating the implementation of Vatican II and dealing with some people who were kind of caught in the crossfire. They were coming into religious life when these changes were happening without a whole lot of clarity. So there was some resistance, but also some hurt. I think the way things were managed, not to blame anyone, but it was just the times. We didn't know exactly where we were going, and then you bring in somebody new, and what are you supposed to tell them, So navigating that, I think, was the biggest challenge. I enjoyed that ministry, but it was challenging. I think one of the accomplishments was making that process much more individualized, so everybody didn't move in and move on at the same time. So the processes of discernment, some people wanted to extend their time, Others wanted to go ahead with vows. Yeah, I think that was probably that seemed fine to me. That seemed normal. Because we don't respond the same way. We don't have the same experiences of spirituality, of personal growth, of relationships. It's, we're all different. So why put everybody moving at the same pace? We had a good team working in theology. But again, it was difficult because Sacred Heart was not the most progressive, theologically, not the most progressive school. So you were working with families and parents where there was a lot of resistance, so trying to teach theology or spirituality or church in a different light was a challenge. Yeah, because you had fewer things that were just right or just wrong. You had to make personal decisions. That's tough. Tough for freshmen and sophomores. Juniors and seniors too. But. I went to Mississippi. One of our superiors called me in one day, and she said, I got this letter from somebody in the northern part of Mississippi, not south. Gosh, I forgot the name of that. Well, anyway, the priests of the Sacred Heart, they have a big mission there, and they're looking for sisters to work in the parishes. And a friend of mine, we were teaching together at Sacred Heart, my superior said to me, she said, I think she really needs a change, and I want to support her in that. Will you go with her? Will you do this together? So we talked about it, not much, but we talked about it and said yes. So we packed up and went to Mississippi. We lived in a mobile home for the time that we were there and started something totally new, totally different. But that was fun. It was basically we were there primarily to develop an outreach program to the poor. And the poor were mostly black. And blacks were not Catholic. So, it was totally different. There were a few poor whites in the area, and they were ostracized even more. The blacks had their own community. They lived in poverty, but they had their own community, whereas these poor whites, was pretty much on their own. But anyway, that was the outreach program was. So there was a secondhand clothing store there. We had funds that we could help people with lights or water when they couldn't pay, and mostly our focus was to bring them together to create opportunities just for singing or storytelling or anything. So we had this little mini bus. It was run down, but we took that all over the county, picking up people and taking them to a meeting and then taking them back afterwards. That was great. And then we also had the religious education in the parishes. There were 3 parishes that we covered. But they were small communities, they were really very remote and rural. And the Catholic population in Mississippi was less than 2%. So yeah, you're not talking about a big number. Oh, that was the other thing that we did. We started these, I say we started, but it wasn't just ourselves. At Thanksgiving and at Christmas, we had ecumenical services. And, all the churches were invited to come to one church. And when we had them coming to our church, we had some of the black people as well. And this did not go over real well with some of the white churches, strictly white churches. But they, they managed it. We managed it. But those were, and we were the only church that had like a social service component to it. So some of the other churches leaned on us to help their folks as well if they needed anything like clothing or food, or we had a food pantry too. And we had a summer program that we did in the public schools. I can't believe this. We did it in the public schools. All the students were African American. There was a government program that sponsored teenage black children, or teenagers, employment in the summer, but they had to work through an institution. So we signed up for them. We had the most wonderful kids working in that program. That program would not have been a success had we not had those African American teenagers. And we had volunteers coming in from across all the states. We put notices in NCR. They used to have this big section in the back of NCR for, volunteer programs or study programs. National Catholic Reporter. So we had religious and seminarians coming from other parts of the country to do volunteer work, and we had housing for them in our white folks who were parishioners. And then we had this group of African American youth who were just wonderful. And they did everything together. It was so much fun. It was so much fun. And I still run into people that I have forgotten about, but who had worked in those programs. That was for 3 or 4 years, I forget. Yeah. And near one of the parishes where we worked, but not where we lived, Holiday Inn had it was a Holiday Inn, but it was a learning, their learning place, training center, and they had a swimming pool. And the director, I guess you call him director of this site, was a parishioner. So we asked him if he could lend us their pool, and he did. We had the pool 2 days a week, because we had the program in 2 different places. So one day a week we took this group over, and the other we took this group over. And they were in the pool. They'd never been in a pool. There never existed pools in, if there were any pools at all, they were private. I mean, it was somebody's home. But no, so that was a great program. It really was fun. I was there 5 years. My partner was there, I think, just 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And she left. She actually left the community. One of the guys who came to volunteer, he was from one of the seminaries. He had, this part of his leg was a wooden leg. So mostly he walked around with slacks on, pants on. But when we went swimming, he took this leg off. The kids just looked. And he was one of the lifeguards. They were just amazed. I mean, I was amazed. Helen O'Brien was in leadership at the time, and she had gone to Peru to visit. She, I guess, was their counselor at the time. And it was at the time when Martha Starman was leaving, and Lee was going to be alone. And she came and asked me, she came to Mississippi for a couple of days. And she came to ask me if I would be interested in going to Peru. When we were first, when the community was first opening the mission there, they asked for volunteers. And I put my name in, but was not chosen. So I played sour grapes for a while. And I said, well, if you didn't want me the first time, you think I'm going to go now? But I did. I went first to, she suggested just going first for a visit. And I did. And I think I was supposed to be there for a month. And in 3 weeks, I told Lee, I said, because Lee was by herself at the time, I said, I'm ready to go back because I know I want to come back. So I said, I don't need another week. So that's, yeah, and then I came to Peru. When we were in elementary school, they started a Spanish program in a select number of schools, and happened to be at St. Raphael's. So I had like, you know, basic Spanish. But then I went to Cuernavaca to study Spanish before going to Peru. And then the first months in Peru, I got into a language program. So no, I didn't really speak Spanish before going. In Carmen de la Legua, where I am now, that was the beginning of, well, when they went, they went to two places. One was the Navy School, which was in the process of being built, and the other was Carmen de la Legua, where they were starting a school. And that's where Lee and Martha started. And both of them were in the school for a while. But then Lee continued and Martha moved more into parish ministry. So yeah, I went to Carmen de la Legua. I worked a lot with women's groups. It was at a time when it was one of the crisis times in the country, and prices had changed. They went skyrocketing, and a shortage of food. And so we had these groups of women that were called the Mothers Clubs, but they were mostly for teaching personal skills and just trying to build community. But at the same time, they received some food support came through the diocese from Catholic Relief Services. So I worked a lot with women's groups and worked with the catechetical program as well in the parish. In Peru, I've been there 44 years. In those beginning years, it was mostly learning for me. I mean, there was so much to learn, but it was exciting. I was excited to learn more about the theology of liberation. I had read the book here in English first, but never read it in terms of thinking in terms of going to Peru. But we had these theology programs every summer the Catholic University put on. And I, along with a lot of other people in our parish, participated. It was an exciting time too. It was the church was growing from ground up, based communities. And for ourselves, it was mostly communities of women and the empowerment of women. Leadership skills, organizational skills, all of that was built into these, what we called mothers clubs that we had. And then we did a networking of, I think there were like 8 or 9 groups throughout the, what was our parish, which was, it's not a large parish geographically, but it was very densely populated. So there were a lot of people. So that was one of the kind of exciting things for me, was to be a part of that and to kind of enable it in some way too. to grow and to keep growing. And then also our catechetical program, we started involving the parents a whole lot more, so that they took responsibility for bringing their children into the faith. That was a shift. That really came out of the theology of liberation, but in a different model, so to speak. But it was the whole reflection process that you see, judge, and act, you know. So that was the model. Initially, Lee was the principal, and she and Martha both worked in the school. And then Martha went to mostly do parish ministry. And then, but Lee continued working with the school, with the teachers, and with the parents up until the time that she decided to go to San Miguel. And I had been in San Miguel, so we kind of traded places. And I went back to Cayal to start the formation program, Formation for the Congregation, yeah. But then, because she left the school, then I went into the school also, because somebody had to do that, because we had that commitment with the diocese that we would be what we call promoters of the school. There were a couple of others that considered it. One was in the formation program. She became a novice. I think she made first vows. I think so. And there were other young women who were part of a Christian community. They lived together in our house with a couple of us. But then eventually moved on to other things, either because of their studies or because of work situation. But we were still connected with them, but they didn't move into the community. I think so, yeah. A lot of that has shifted over the years, but there's always been, on the level of Peru, there's always been a core group that have worked in social justice very intentionally. And we've always been connected with that. Depending upon who the pastor was, whether or not we could really get people in the parish involved. But we've always had a few people always connected with that ministry, you know, with social justice. Yeah. And there are a couple of people, well, this gets complicated. But we have, when I first went to Carmen de la Legua, we had, politically it was a difficult time also, but we had people from different parishes that kind of thought like we did and who were involved in the theology of liberation. And so representatives of those parishes, we met together once a month. We're still meeting together. Even though the diocese has changed over the years enormously, and now we have a new bishop who is really a very fine person. But this group still continues to meet. And so we support each other in the difficult times pastorally, but difficult times politically as well. During the time of the Sendero Luminoso, which was the terrorist group, we set up, if anything happened in one or another of our houses or our parishes or with one of our groups, we had a code that we would send out to the rest of the group so that they would be notified that they were either came into the house or they attacked one of us, or it was an interesting time, but it was a very supportive time. And then our group was connected to a Lima group, and the Lima group was connected to throughout the country. It was not as vital in all of the provinces, some of the provinces much more than others, but regardless, there was this network of connection around social justice and the defense of those people who were being most attacked by the terrorist group. And then the government did their backlash as well. No, I think, you know, there's always been supportive people around. Our pastor, when I got there, was just a wonderful person. He still is. He's up in years now, and right now he has some severe health issues. But he was very good. He was a professor at the Catholic University for years, very involved in the human rights movements in a lot of different ways. And I don't think we would have been that involved had it not been for him, because he really put us in contact with these different groups and encouraged and sometimes insisted that we be present. And we participated in a lot of the marches that were held downtown, not in the recent ones because they've been much more confusing. It's mixed groups. A lot of violent groups get filtered in there. But earlier, yeah, we did participate, but a lot of it had to do because of his support. So there's always been that community of support in some way. It's changed over the years, maybe different people coming in and out, but yeah, we still. And it's very life-giving. It's very life-giving, yeah, and challenging. And it invites you to, you know, read more of this rather than that. You know, I mean, there are tons of things you could get involved in, but you have to make choices. And those choices, you know, correspond to your belief system, your, you know, what you think is important in life. Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Spiritually, academically, the way I use my time, the things I think about, the people I want to stay in touch with. I've lost a lot of friends in the way, because your time is limited and you can't, at least I feel like I'm not that good at staying in touch with a lot of people if we don't have more in common. So I know that as a consequence I've lost some friends. But, you know, you do, I think, what you can. You know, every grain of sand goes to build something. I think continue to, like right now I'm working with two groups. One is a group of young women. The other was a group of, it's a mixed group. Both of them were involved in our parish years ago as teenagers. They've gone on to study and built their own, some are married, some have children. But now they want to do things for the younger people coming up. So that is very life-giving to me. You know, they didn't just keep it for themselves. You know, they didn't just make them happy, but now they're doing something similar for other youth and other young people. So that to me is what it's about. You just keep giving and the circle goes on, you know, circle like in Judy's Mass. I love that song, the circle, it never ends, it's never broken. So just keeping that circle alive and well and happy, and kind of what it's about. I think it's the other way around. I think the charism is what helps me live my life. I think that, you know, that union of contemplative love and an active service is what, you know, keeping those two connected and bonded and charging one another with energy. Yeah, I think that's what does it. And trying to keep that always in focus. because it's easy to get it out of focus, you know. Yeah, I think that opened up, you know, a much broader understanding and the deeper awareness, a deeper spirituality. I think in coming to the Ursulines, I came without, and I didn't have words for this, but the charism was lived in the women that I knew. They didn't call it that. I certainly didn't. I never heard of it until at a later time. But then as we did explore just what charism itself meant, and then what Angela's charism meant, yeah, that deepened a whole lot more things and made more sense to me. I mean, made the connection. Even some of the changes that we've been talking about, we did those changes because we felt it was right, but then understanding the charism as the reason for it, that made a whole lot more sense and made it all connected so someone wasn't running off doing her thing like maybe people were accused of at one time. No, it was that spirit of Angela and that spirit working through us. We didn't always have words for it. You know, we didn't always define it. We didn't know that, but that's what it was, and that is the movement of the spirit. It doesn't belong to us, and it's not ours to hold on to. It's ours to live and share.